one presentation in Spanish, so you might want to have the translation units with you if you.
Do you know what channel that is?
I don't, but if you flip through them, you can quickly find it. Okay, so we'll kick off first with Andrew Deutz, who's going to give us a presentation on the discussion of the challenges of measuring ecosystem. The challenges of measuring ecosystem services and quantifying values of the services. So let me just bring that up. Go for it.
Thanks. Good afternoon and welcome back from lunch, everybody. I'm Andrew Deutz, Director of International Government Relations with the Nature Conservancy. I'm going to give you a little talk. Much of what was prepared describes work that we're doing in Latin America and starting to export elsewhere, including export back to the United States. Which means if we're successful in implementing water funds from Latin America into the United States, it will be an excellent example of South-North technology transfer. What I'm presenting on is what we call water funds, but basically that's a nice term that basically describes a simple payment for ecosystem services scheme. And it's a simple cycle. So you've got municipal water users who pay into a fund. The fund is used to finance restoration and conservation activities in the upper watershed. That improves water quality and in a few cases water quantity, which benefits the users downstream, and then the cycle continues. The first model where we got this started took us about 12 years to get it going in Quito, Ecuador. It's a population of about 2 million people. And to be honest, we started out looking as a funding mechanism for the Condo Biosphere Reserve, which is upstream from Quito. Developed the model and are now able to replicate it. As I said, basically it's putting money in taxing, in a sense, it is taxing. The municipality takes a slight amount of tariff out of the water fund, or so I should say out of the municipal utilities taxes for water and pays into the fund. And there was actually a political vote that the municipal residents in Quito understood where their water was coming from and were willing to pay for it to actually basically increase their taxes, in fact increase their water utility rates to provide for funding for the fund that protects the upper watershed. This is a bit of a sidebar. As the Nature Conservancy working in the United States, we have run a number of ballot initiatives to try and raise money for conservation activities in the United States. Our best selling point for any ballot initiative is around providing water for people to drink. We recently, in 2010, we won a ballot initiative in Texas for conservation activities, which was dedicating a portion of the sales tax to protect water. Texas is not exactly pro-taxes or pro-conservation, and yet people get the connection between where their drinking water comes from and what they need to pay to preserve it. So the model works in Ecuador, it works in Texas as well. Why do these things? Well, there's a simple economic rationale. The chart here is showing water quantity, which is not too much affected by the conservation activities, but the changes in water quality based on measuring sedimentation inside the protected area that we use as a baseline versus outside. And so by improving the conservation practices, you can see a 10-to-1 difference in the sedimentation. By improving the conservation practices and improving farming practices, you can significantly reduce the sedimentation. In this particular case, which is in Bogota, that led to a net savings in the system of about $4.5 million. The people who are paying into the system are both public sector and private sector. So you've got the mayor of Bogota overseeing the water utility, putting money into the fund because it's cost effective to reduce costs for the water utility. But you also have the Bogota brewery paying into the water fund because they ran the numbers, and on a pure economic financial rationale from a bottom line private sector interest, it was cheaper for them to pool their funds and pay for upstream conservation than to build a water filtration plant. The net result in that case is conservation is contributing to cheaper beer. Everybody wins. The last example I want to show is work that we're doing in the Cauca Valley, which is the watershed above Cali in Colombia. working in partnership with Asakana, which is the sugarcane growers association. It's the same basic model of water users paying into the fund. What makes the example in the Cauca Valley somewhat unique is that the interventions of changing farming practices and improving riparian conservation in the upper watershed is not only improving water quality, but it's also improving water quantity. The conservation improvements are moderating the seasonality of the flow and are improving dry season flow. Dry season, or water availability in the dry season, is a major constraint on productivity for the sugarcane producers. They've done their own economic modeling that shows by improving dry season flow, there's more water available for irrigation, which means more sugarcane productivity, which means more profits. They've calculated a 30-to-1 return on investment. That would make Wall Street ecstatic. So conservation is definitely a good investment, at least in this case. The other thing I want to show here is just the sort of the stages that we go through in setting up these various water funds. We're now operating or trying to get them going in 32 or in watersheds above 32 municipalities in Latin America. Starting with sort of the feasibility, which we're going to focus on here, is the methodology for getting that going. Starting up with a little bit of seed capital. In the case of Latin America, where for these 32 water funds that we're getting going, we've raised about $27 million, which we use as seed capital for the water funds, which then we're anticipating will leverage roughly $500 million over time as these things get fully capitalized, create endowments, and spit out money over time. That will potentially improve water quality for 50 million municipal users downstream from those conservation activities. We've captured what we've done and sort of the secret sauce of how we set up the water funds and how they work, and both the science and the legal machinations we go through in setting up the financial mechanisms. This is a guidebook that we put out, sort of a how-to or a cookbook that we released at the last World Water Forum in Marseille, available at Conserve Online. So I'm just going to kind of walk through it briefly. In doing the feasibility analysis, when you try to pull together the GIS and you try to pull together all the different modeling, what are all the different factors that you've got to be looking at? What are the hard things to deal with? You got to look at the status of the watershed. Part of the trickier parts are mapping or trying to understand the benefits, particularly not just what the ecological benefits are, but the socioeconomic benefits, and then the stakeholder analysis that goes along with who's going to benefit in the upper watershed. Where you need to make the conservation investments, the cost of both establishing and maintaining those investments, and then look at various scenarios, particularly in the face of climate change. And then ultimately, can you map the other ecosystem services? We rely primarily on the INVEST model from the Natural Capital Project, which is a partnership between Stanford University, TNC, and WWF. This is just indicating a number of the different variables that go into the model that we're trying to look at in each one of the funds. This is an example of some of the model runs, looking at a whole range of different ecosystem services that we go into, and then try to figure out how do you actually optimize the investments. Once the water fund is spitting out money, and you can start to make some investments, where do you get the best bang for the buck along a whole range of different things and optimize them? So we've also, since we first started doing this and came up with the methodology about 12 years ago in Quito, we've added in a layer of analysis looking at climate change impacts. Working in the northern tropical Andes, in a lot of these places, the climate modeling suggests that they're going to get wetter, which you might think makes life easier, but not really. Because in most cases there will be we anticipate there will be changes in the seasonality of the flow regime. So if you're making long-term investments and you're promising municipalities that they're going to have water in the future, clean water in the future, you better make sure that those things are resilient. So we're now going back and adding in a modeling system called Climate Wizard that allows you to pool together various model runs from all the GCMs at a fairly fine resolution to try and anticipate what changes in maximums and minimums of precipitation and temperature are going to be, so we can model that out over time and incorporate it into the models. Just some of the examples of what some of that looks like. And then lastly, there's a piece that goes in around the socioeconomic analysis and the legal and institutional side. So part of it is the valuation of the ecosystem services and benefits. But one of the toughest things that we're finding actually is measuring the socioeconomic impacts of who's going to benefit. So trying to undertake the household level analysis. When you're making investments in the upper watershed, it's either a direct payment system where you're paying farmers to change their farming practices, or you're paying people to work on government land to do the restoration activities, forest conservation activities, who benefits and who decides? And we still have a lot of work to do to get a better handle on, if you will, the socioeconomic impacts and how that breaks down along ethnic, gender, and socioeconomic status lines. And then there's some work that goes into as well, the legal institutional analysis, because you set up the water fund. The fund itself is always set up as a public-private partnership. So you've got both non-governmental organizations, government organizations, in some cases the private sector, sitting on the board, making decisions about where those conservation investments are going to go, which adds a certain level of transparency, but also a certain level of complexity to the decision-making process. And then there's different legal machinations about how you set up those kinds of public-private partnerships that you need to sort through. This is just indicating what some of those conservation investments actually look like. In some cases, it's direct payments for alternative livelihood strategies. Above Quito, it's been working with local communities to provide them, in a sense, functioning like a microfinance operation to provide alternative livelihood strategies around different agricultural or industrial activities. In some cases, it's changing agricultural practices. This is one of our best examples when I talk to people who are not a conservation audience about what we do, and I can make it very simple. Don't muddy the water. So usually that just means putting up a fence to keep the cows out of the water, literally. That imposes a cost to the farmer, so there needs to be a payment to compensate for that cost. Reforestation, particularly around riparian zones and some other things. And then there's a number of interventions we also do around in Quito and elsewhere to improve the management effectiveness of the protected areas, improve the ecology in the protected areas, and then improves the water supply as well. The last challenge we face is on monitoring. So this is just one of the watersheds to give you an indication of the monitoring that goes in on the biophysical side around looking at precipitation and flow, water quality, water quantity. One of the challenges that we have, to be completely transparent, is we have not yet developed good protocols or good methodology for monitoring the socioeconomic impacts of the water funds and what's happening with those payments and who's benefiting in the upper watersheds. So we've got some challenge to go. We're pretty good, and we as the conservation community, not just TC, but we are pretty good at monitoring some of the biophysical impacts. We have a lot of work to do to figure out better ways to measure in real time the socioeconomic impacts and implications. And lastly, it's just a map to show where we're working and experimenting with these things. We've got 10 or 11 of them that are up and running operationally. We've got another 17 that we're working on, a number that are in the design or conceptual stage. The interesting thing is, I say, we learned a lot from the Catskill story in New York City, and that was the original impetus for the work that we did in Quito. And having gotten the proof of concept in Quito and Bogota, we were then able to go to demonstrate proof of replicability now, working throughout 32 sites in Latin America. We're also exporting the technology back to the United States. So we've got one that we're in the design stage on in Albuquerque, New Mexico, another one we're looking at in Texas. We're also trying to get something going on the Tana River above Nairobi. So that'll be an interesting challenge because you're going from, I think it's fairly easy to sort of export the technology from a middle-income country where you've got a per capita GDP of $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 per person per year. It's a fairly decent resource base to draw on financially. To export that back to the United States is fairly easy. We're going to see the financial challenges if we can make it work when we export this to Kenya, where the per capita GDP is about 1/10 of what it is in Colombia. But we're fairly optimistic it can work there. Hopefully it's infinitely scalable in a sense, where you've got the geography right, where you can use, basically create the or take advantage of the green infrastructure to improve water quality, to save money, to make municipalities more sustainable. The other thing that we're finding is that it helps as you start to connect people in the lower water, or people in the cities, to the upper watershed. They understand where their water comes from, they understand the conservation value, they understand the benefit that they get from that conservation, and they're willing to pay for it when they have the opportunity. So that in itself is also helping to reconnect people to nature and to maintain an important urban constituency for nature conservation outside of urban areas. Thank you.
There's time for like one quick question. We can have more detailed questions when we get into the panel discussion. We can question back to these talks, but if there's any quick clarifying questions, then we can do. Roving mic. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Just a really quick question. The little dot in Mexico, where is that?
It's in Monterey, but I'm not sure.
Okay. Thanks very much, Andrew. Thanks. Okay, so the next presentation is going to be from Tej Mankor from Wetlands International, and let me bring that up for Tej. And he is going to be giving a case study on ecological restoration in Chilika Lake. And
Off you go. Thanks a lot. Well, good afternoon, everybody. This presentation was prepared by colleagues of mine, both at Wetlands International and the Chilika Lake Development Authority, which is the state government body responsible for managing the lake, Chilika Lake. It's a Ramsar site, and it's located in the eastern part of the country here in the state of Orissa, and it's down on the coast, but is fed by a very large watershed. As you can see here, this is one of the largest lagoons in Asia. It is a brackish water lagoon. It has become largely freshwater over the 90s when the connection between the sea and the lake was blocked. It became more fresh. Now there's been management action, and I'll show you a little bit of that, to restore some of that connection to the sea, because with the freshwater, with the lake turning completely fresh, both fish production, finfish production, and dropped, as well as the reeds, freshwater reeds started growing and caused a lot of problem, choking of the wetlands. So there was management action instituted by the government that has helped to solve that problem. The water, the lake is fed by what's called the western catchment, shorter streams on the west side, and the Mahanadi River, which comes from the eastern side, which drains down through a larger area here, and much of the water of the Mahanadi now goes down to the right. The area is extremely important in terms of biodiversity, and some of the values here are identified. It is one of the most important places in the country for migratory water birds along the Central Asian flyway. These are birds that come from Siberia, China, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Mongolia. These are of a very diverse type. You've got ducks and geese, cranes, shorebirds, and a whole bunch of other species thrown in. It has been recognized as an internationally important site, but monitoring over the last few years have shown quite a lot of changes, and there's been various monitoring programs to try and understand first how many water birds are there, what are their habitat preferences, and what really defines their use of this wetland, because it's changed a lot over time. It's also an important site for other biodiversity in terms of aquatic mammals, and the dolphin is the dolphin is one species that's found here in fair numbers. You've got turtles breeding on the coast, not very large numbers in the immediate vicinity of the lake, because the sand beach is a rather narrow beach. And is that okay? Yeah. And you've got an extremely high diversity of freshwater fish, brackish water fish, and crabs and prawns. Because of this large diversity and abundance of fish, you've got traditionally a very poor community of fishermen who live on the lake and fish there. You can see the numbers for yourself. You've got 0.2 million people who are divided into 137 villages, and this is complemented by people in the floodplain that, over 1,000 villages, and 0.7 million people. So it's a huge human community that depends on this lake for their livelihood. And they mainly use traditional means of trapping for fish. So you've got a variety of gear, not so much commercial fishing. Few of the boats are motorized, but most of them are using traps. Thank you. Looking at the economic benefits of the wetland, so there have been various assessments done, looking primarily at fisheries, ecotourism, which is getting very popular in the area, the aquatic vegetation, which is used for by the farmers there for their cattle, as well as inland navigation. This lake is over 60 kilometers long and 40 kilometers wide, and is fed by these rivers, and so freshwater or irrigation, transportation along these rivers, as well as the lake, is quite an important means of communication for the people, both for people movement as well as for goods. The estimated annual income or benefits from these wetlands is nearly $63 million, and you can see the breakdown. Much of it is from tourism, over 46 million, 15